Selecting a team name just might be the most unenviable task in all of sports because there's always going to be a group of people out there who dislike it and want something else. There is also an odd balance that must be struck between a nickname needing time to grow on a fan base or it just simply not resonating, it not being a good name to begin with. Case in point, the Washington Commanders. Is it a bad team name because folks aren't used to it, or does it simply stink? Personally, I'm inclined to think the latter because, well, Washington football team felt like it was a better identity for that franchise. However, there are people out there who disagree with me. There's really just no consensus here. Regardless, anyone needing to come up with a new moniker for their sports franchise would be wise to look at another Washington, this one on the opposite coast of the United States. There you will find one of the wildest struggles with finding a nickname that fit. This is the story of how the University of Washington went from no name to a joke name to an administration appointed name and finally the Husky name we all know and love today. As the 1910s were coming to a close, various schools in both the Northwest and America as a whole had begun adopting mascots or nicknames for their athletic programs. Oregon State had embraced Beavers, Washington State was known as the Cougars, and Idaho had taken on the Vandals moniker. Ironically enough, Heck Edmondson, the man whose basketball team would actually inspire U of I to embrace the Vandals name for its athletics program, would have a front row seat for a bunch of drama that was about to unfold at the University of Washington. He had been named the school's basketball coach in 1920 and found himself smack dab in the middle of controversy surrounding what exactly Washington was going to call its athletic teams. Prior to 1919, no one at UW seemed all of that bothered with coming up for a nickname and a mascot for the sports teams, apart from a few school officials. Efforts by and large were met with apathy from the student body. Then 1919 hit. An event that had absolutely nothing to do with sports would shape the name of the athletic teams for the following few years. A student magazine named the Sun Dodger was published at this time. It was apparently fairly raunchy for 1919 and it drew the ire of school administrators. Showing disdain for something is of course the worst thing school administrators can do on any college campus in the United States, even to this day. With that in mind, students began informally referring to the University of Washington sports teams as the Sun Dodgers. Now, this wasn't used in an official capacity, at least in that first year. According to an article from the school's student newspaper, The Daily, in 2019, local sports writers had begun referring to Washington as the Sun Dodgers, but the school refused to recognize that as the name. That article, by the way, a great article, has a lot of interesting tidbits in it, and I'll put a link to that in the description of this video. Unfortunately, the Daily itself had a hand in making matters surrounding Washington's name even worse. At the beginning of 2020, the school newspaper had announced that it submitted a list of potential team names to the Washington student government so everyone could vote on one, and UW would finally have a name for its sports teams. As Americans are wont to do when selecting a name in a public vote, the joke option won. The school nickname, the University of Washington nickname, was officially the Sun Dodgers. In other words, the school was named after a humor magazine, a student-published humor magazine that school officials simply did not like. This is basically the OG version of Bodie McBoatface. Perhaps the biggest issue was that no one knew what the hell a Sun Dodger was. Everyone just assumed the worst. Officially, the magazine had claimed it called itself the Sun Dodger because that was a cowboy term for an unbroken horse. The school felt it was a reference to staying up all night and getting into nefarious activities while sleeping during the day. Obviously, the exact opposite of what it felt a good student should be doing. And then there was the city of Seattle itself. What's felt the Sun Dodger name referred to the stereotypical weather one may expect to find in Seattle. It was the Sun Dodgers because, well, their sun was never out. If the name was confusing, the actual Sun Dodgers mascot was, well, I mean, just take a look at this thing for yourself. I'm at a loss for words for what exactly this is supposed to represent. They called it Sunny Boy. Apparently, it's supposed to represent a good, wholesome college student, but honestly, this thing looks like it's about 9 years old. What it has to do with sun dodging, apart from having sun in the name, is anyone's guess. But gosh almighty, did the University of Washington student body really lean in to the Sun Dodger nickname and this as their mascot? They actually had a 3.5-foot statue of Sunny Boy made. Despite the thing weighing some 70 odd pounds and being fairly conspicuous, Sunny Boy got around. Students would carry this thing to football games, and then well after the mascot and name had been retired, it took on sort of this life of its own. Somehow the statue found its way to Indiana but would be returned to Seattle, and then in the 1990s it was stolen and recovered again. That is a Carmen Sandiego-esque level of statue monument stealing. Anyway, as for the Sun Dodgers name, well, it stuck around for 1920 and 1921. Eventually, though, the school hatched a plan to dump it once and for all. As mentioned earlier, UW students really seemed to like the name. They did not want to let it go, but school administrators and quite a few folks in Seattle itself thought the name was derogatory and just wanted to be done with it. Throughout the final months of 1921, there were calls to change the names, but students would not budge. Knowing this, those at the school waited for an opportune time to strike, a time when they wouldn't face any resistance to the name change. And there is perhaps no more opportune time on a college campus than Christmas break. With most students away for the holidays, on Tuesday, December 27th, 1921, the University of Washington banned the Sun Dodgers nickname. What's more, they unilaterally selected a new nickname for the school with zero student input. Henceforth, the University of Washington was to be known as the Vikings. This was the name alumni as well as influential people in Seattle preferred. That name didn't really take either. Students came back to campus after Christmas and announced their displeasure at not being consulted over any name change. The school acquiesced to a certain extent. The Sun Dodgers name was out, that was not coming back, but they would work with students to find an acceptable alternative. Here's where the timeline gets a little murky. In January 1922, we know for certain that there were discussions amongst students, faculty, administration, alumni. Everyone was getting together to talk about what the next name should be. After talks, Husky was selected as the preferred option by all parties. Instead of just imposing it on the full student body as it had tried to do with Vikings, the school opted for, I guess, what you consider a soft launch of the new mascot. We know the Huskies name was first mentioned to a larger audience during halftime of a Washington basketball game in February 1922. From that point on, the Huskies name grew organically. There was never a vote amongst the students. There was never really a statement saying, this is our name from this point forward. It just sort of became the name. It took time. In fact, you can find newspapers using the Sun Dodgers name beyond February 1922, but over time, UW transformed into the Huskies. Naturally, one of the fraternities adopting a Husky puppy certainly helped matters. As the Husky moniker grew in popularity and eventually took hold, the Sun Dodgers name, well, it didn't fade away entirely. One of the school's real-life Husky mascots was called Sun Dodger Denali, and the university's ultimate frisbee team also goes by the name the Sun Dodgers. They don't use that little kid logo though. Instead, they repurposed the old Seattle Mariners Trident logo. Finally, as for the Sun Dodger magazine, the entire cause of the name ordeal at the University of Washington, well, it did not make it out of the 1920s either. According to school records, the last issue was published in 1923. If that wasn't proof the name Sun Dodgers was nothing more than a passing fancy, then I don't know what is. The moral of the story here is do not let students vote on the name of anything unless you want them to choose the dumbest or most ironic option. That can't be right, can it? I don't know. You know, the thing about Seattle, though, is that the city itself has never been afraid to make a bold choice when it comes to a sports team name. Just look at the Seattle Kraken for proof of that. That name is a really interesting example because, in many ways, Kraken could have been nothing more than a meaningless word fans wanted without really thinking about it. However, those behind the scenes worked extremely diligently to make the Kraken name come to life, to give it meaning, to make sure it had substance, and quite frankly, it is one of the better visual identities in sports today. The Sun Dodgers, though, they never had that substance or that purpose. All they had was a 3.5-foot statue of a little boy who was allegedly a college student. When Sonny Boy isn't disappearing to the Midwest or being stolen, he can still be found on the UW campus. Although, after looking at that and then taking a peek at Dubs too, I think we can all agree here the University of Washington made the right choice when it came to their team name. Thank you for watching this video. I am going to miss the Pac-12 quite a bit, and to understand why that is, video lower right hand corner of your screen is the place to go. And to learn about the college football team that went undefeated and still rejected a bowl bid, video upper right hand corner of your screen is where you can check it out. Until next time, I'm Shine Hollis, this is The Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.